Hi, this is Sue Schmidt with WICHE. I want to welcome you today to the presentation on improving student success in allied health programs at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Our guest speaker today is Lynda Hernandez, who is the Student Success Coordinator for the University of Alaska, Anchorage in the School of Allied Health. Just a little bio in relationship to Lynda. She has a great deal of experience in working with students in rural areas. As a lifelong Alaskan, Hernandez has spent the entirety of her professional career working in health programs for the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Hernandez started her careers in student services, working with a high school summer program for youth interested in health careers. Since then, she has committed to promoting the development of health programs in both rural and urban settings. Hernandez currently works full-time for the UAA School of Allied Health as a Student Success Coordinator. She recruits students for allied programs, provides academic advising to new and continuing students, and organizes division-wide K-12 outreach efforts to promote health careers. She also helps coordinate summer opportunities for middle and high school students interested in health occupations. As you know, this webinar is funded by the U.S. Department of Labor. And of course, also they indicate the product was created by the grantee and does not necessarily reflect the official position of the U.S. Department of Labor. All right, with that, I'm going to advance to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Lynda. Thanks, Lynda, for joining us today.
Thank you, Sue. Well, thank you very much for attending. I hope that what I provide you today is useful for you in your practice. I have been working with, so actually Sue did a really great introduction. I've been working with the School of Allied Health for the last 7 years. I actually am an alumni of the University of Alaska Anchorage. Kudos to anyone, or brownie points, anyone who can guess what my undergraduate degrees are in. So I'll ask you guys after the presentation's over if you can guess. And I am currently enrolled in 2 different master's degree programs, and I have no idea what I'm going to be doing with those afterwards, because I do really enjoy the work that I do with students. So I'm going to give you a little overview of the presentation. I will be giving you a brief history of the Denali Student/Trainee Success Project that I've been working on for the last 7 years. It's very similar in scope, and after talking with Sue, it seems that it's very similar in scope to the project that you all are involved in. And I'm going to be discussing the process that we went through in identifying barriers to student success, and the subsequent development of goals and activities in the facilitation of that student success. Then kind of end with some words of wisdom based on my experience over the last 7 years, and I've done a lot, and there's a lot of things that have worked, and there's a lot of things that haven't worked, some of which may benefit you. Please feel free to stop me at any time to ask questions or for clarification. A lot of times I tend to go on autopilot, and if I say something that is a little confusing, just kind of raise your hand and say, wait, can you hold up really quick? Can you go back and clarify? So the development, Alaska has a really robust health program kind of feature through the University of Alaska SIStant. We're in more than 250 locations around the state, and we have over 4,200 health-centered focused students at all levels. And we have about 1,200 completers each year. I think this data is about a couple of years old. So I would anticipate that the numbers would actually increase because we have new health programs that have developed since these numbers came out. And we probably develop health programs, we add about one a year. So there are a growing number of options for students in the state. The Denali Trainee Success Project was originally funded by the Denali Commission. It's a statewide organization that funds a variety of different projects. And I wanted to give you a little bit of context to why our project was created. The Denali Commission actually funded the development of health clinics in rural areas in about 2004, maybe a little bit earlier than that. So the thought was, well, we're going to build these health clinics, so we actually need to train people to work in these health clinics in rural areas. So the Denali project that we developed, or the University of Alaska developed, was really in line with other projects that the Denali Commission was funding at the time. And the whole goal was really to develop these distance-delivered health programs to really better the health of individuals living in rural communities. It was a collaborative University of Alaska project, so we actually have 3 different main campuses that make up the University of Alaska system: the University of Alaska Fairbanks, the University of Alaska Southeast, which is located, the main campus is located in Juneau, Alaska, and then my home campus, which is the University of Alaska Anchorage. It's really was designed to address rural Alaska allied health workforce needs in a way of improving health of rural populations. We wanted to really improve the access of rural students for the main reason that we wanted to really adopt the grow our own philosophy. We wanted to grow our own workforce that was committed to living and learning in their area, because one of the issues is we've had a revolving door of itinerant healthcare workers who go out for a short period of time and then leave this kind of empty gap. So by training people that live in those communities and want to stay there, then hopefully you'll have a much more consistent delivery of health in the community. And through years 1 through 6, we've had more than 1,300 individuals that were trained as part of this project. We actually are in the sunset phase of this particular project, and the funding will end June 30th, which I am actually very excited about because I've had to do grant reports 4 times a year since I first started the job in 2006. So I'm a little excited to go to the general funds through the university. So to give you some context as to why coaches and advisors and student success coordinators are important, Denali Commission spent the bulk of the funding that we received was really to support the migration of face-to-face courses and the development of new courses into an online format. So that meant hiring faculty members. It meant hiring instructional designers to create interactive content. And it meant taking these courses that were traditionally face-to-face and moving them to this new online Blackboard format. So it was a huge time and cost of an investment to be able to do that. The initial part of the student success coordinators that were hired as part of this project were really to forge a statewide marketing effort to enroll students. But a big kind of boo-boo happened. They got students into the courses, but that didn't necessarily mean that students were being successful. So the first couple of years of the project, what they found was that they had high numbers initially, but a small fraction of those students were actually being successful. And so there was this bit of a kind of uh-oh moment. What are we going to do? We really need to make sure that these students are being successful, because it doesn't bode well from a grant perspective to our to the Denali Commission if we're showing these really dismal numbers and this huge cost of investment up front. So they did what's called a root cause analysis, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with the root cause analysis, but this root cause analysis was conducted in, I believe, summer of 2006, right before I was hired. It involved interviewing students, faculty, something.
It looks like,
happened.
I don't know why it started sharing. I'm going to go,
oh,
there we go. So I think somehow you hit, somehow you hit the slide sharing.
Okay.
Or somehow it
I'll
happened.
try not
but here
to
we go.
Okay.
Okay.
So what this involved was interviewing students, faculty in the program, and community stakeholders, meaning we actually worked very closely with the community hospitals and clinics So their managers were actually mentors for our students in many cases, and really strong recruiters because they were identifying prospective students for our programs. So their goal was to really identify what the factors were that were impacting student success. And it resulted in the identification of 9 barriers to student success. So the first one was students who register late may be too behind to succeed, which is actually a very important piece and seems very intuitive that yes, if they're starting late, they're not going to be successful. But we were having issues getting students to us soon enough to get them enrolled and get the payment issues figured out to get their books to them. So that was something that they identified as a barrier. Students may not feel like the system is prepared to support them. That was actually a very common theme, and it's actually present in some of these other areas, that really there was just this underlying, I don't feel supported by the university. Students don't know how to access technology-based services. This was a big one because there was an assumption that if it was built in an online format, which seemed very well received even before it was developed, that they would know how to use it. While anyone who's used Blackboard or Illuminate Live or any of these features knows there's a little bit of a learning curve. And that wasn't really being taught to students. So that was something that we're like, oh, okay, well, we need to be more engaged with helping students access technology. Meaningful resources are not dedicated to support students. That one was really interesting because these student success coordinators were dedicated to working with students. So there had to be something that was missing there. Tutoring services were inadequate. Support services for students on the main campus were insufficient. And then remote Alaska Native students needed a little bit greater support in different university processes to be successful. Advising is difficult. This was both from a student perspective and in a faculty perspective, who were at the time the primary advisors. Faculty didn't know how to advise at a distance. Even in 2006, distance delivered programs were still, relatively new, at least in Alaska. And there wasn't a lot of knowledge on how to bridge that gap between student and university. And then, again, there was no bridge between rural communities and the UA system. So there was just no connector to help people in rural communities stay connected to the university system. So the final conclusion was that there was insufficient support services for UA at-distance students, which made sense because these students were not being successful. Well, there weren't enough support services in place to really help students be successful. To illustrate this point, I wanted to talk a little bit about my first trip to rural Alaska. I was hired in October 2006. In about, I would say 6 weeks, I was trying to pinpoint when I actually went out to Bethel, in November or December, somewhere around there. I took my first trip out to Bethel. This is actually a photo of Bethel during the summertime. I went during the winter. If I showed you during the wintertime, it would be all white. So that it wouldn't be a very interesting photo, but this shows you kind of the river and stream systems that are in our northwest area of Alaska. And actually, I'm going to go to the next slide to show you. Anchorage is, and I don't know if I can, oops, I don't want to raise my hand. But Anchorage is south central Alaska, and Bethel is northwest of Anchorage. It has a population of about 5,000 people, and you have to understand my context in that I grew up in urban Alaska. So I'd never been out to a rural area. I really don't count traveling on the ferry system throughout the southeast, which is southeast, obviously, of Anchorage. But it was the first time flying into Bethel, which is really only accessible by plane or boat, and most people fly into Bethel. And I remember actually being told, well, do you have the proper snow gear? And I'm thinking, well, I live in Alaska. I do have the proper snow gear. What do you mean? They're like, well, people freeze to death out there. I'm like, well, are you going to have me staying out there for am I going to be standing outside? So I was a little actually scared going out to Bethel when I first first had my trip. But I went out there as a recruitment measure to really start recruiting students, but also to speak to the students who are currently in our program. So we have students in our pharmacy technology program. We have students in some dental assisting courses that we were distance delivering, some phlebotomy courses, and some limited radiography courses. So we had 4 programs going on at the time at different stages of development. And I went out there to, with my division director at the time, to really talk to the local community campus, the Kuskokwim campus, that's part of University of Alaska Fairbanks, and the hospital, the Yukon-Kuskokwim Health Corporation, and then the students in the program. What we were finding even at that point, in October is about midway through our semester, is that students at that point were already dropping like flies. So we were going out there in part to recruit students, but in part to figure out what was going on and how we could help students at the time. The issue was, the biggest issue actually was the dental assisting students. There were about 12 students that were enrolled in that particular course that was being offered, and I would say about 2 of them were actually going to be successful. And walking into a room with students, it was during their lunch break. We were there kind of as an olive branch to say, how are things going? I was very green, very new to this job. And they were very upset. One, because they weren't being successful. They didn't feel like the faculty understood what they were going through. They didn't feel like there was enough support going on. And one of the biggest issues that we were finding is that they weren't going to be successful. And then subsequently, they were going to have to pay back their tuition and fees as part of the educational benefits for the Yukon-Kuskokwim Health Corporation, who were paying for their education. So that was actually a big, staggering issue for us, because here I am very new to the job. I'm just done training, and I don't even know how to address this issue. I knew at that point really that we had really lost some momentum, and that we lost those students, and that the chances of us really getting those students back would be very slim, primarily because of their first very negative interaction with the university and with these programs. So we had to do a little bit of backpedaling and figure out really what was going on. So I want to talk a little bit about student demographics, because context really is everything. It's one thing to go and sell a program, and I use that kind of with quotations, to sell a program to a student and say how wonderful it is, and you can do it from your own home, and you can do it in your free time. But what I guess at the time that I didn't quite understand, coming from this different context of growing up in urban Alaska, being a traditional college student, so going into college right after high school, then starting the working process and kind of going through day-to-day life, I had to face the fact that my student demographic was very different than my own perspective. So almost all were from rural Alaska. We had a few students in our program that were from more urban areas, but really most of them were from rural Alaska. Most were non-traditional students. So many of them had very limited interaction with the university prior to their engagement in Denali formatted or Denali supported distance delivered courses. Most were full-time, worked full-time as healthcare providers. So they were community health aides, they were nurses, they were people, pharmacy technicians. They had jobs in the hospitals or were working full-time. In rural areas, there's high employee turnover. So the hard part is getting them into a class and actually making sure that they would stay put, because there was a chance that they wouldn't stay with that position very long. There was a vast difference in educational backgrounds. So there was everything from just a high school education upwards of people who had bachelor's degrees. And so I had to kind of adjust what I did based on those differences in educational backgrounds. Huge difference in technical abilities. Because most of the students were non-traditional, I would say that the technical abilities of the students that I was working with were actually a little under-prepared to deal with the online formatting of the courses. And I had very few students who were actually traditional and didn't really need a lot of assistance with the technical piece of doing online classes. Most were not, did not understand the university language or culture. And that was also a huge piece that I think that most, I'd say, advisors underestimate how influential that can be when you're talking about registration and admissions and deadlines and dates and all of that, especially in a rural area where time is just very different. Getting students to understand why registering by a certain date is important, or why paying your bill on time is really important so that you don't incur a late fee, was actually a huge barrier to overcome. And then the physical location was outside of campus territory. So what I mean by that, and I have a slide more to illustrate that, I'll go back here. In Bethel was actually UAF territory, because that's actually one of their campuses. Anchorage, so crossing these campus lines actually became a little difficult because we all have different policies and procedures in place. So that became a little bit cumbersome to navigate, and I had to do a lot of work with the other campuses to make sure that it had minimal impact on the students. So we had to take all of what we had learned and transform that into something tangible. So our goal was really to provide a suite of support services to enable rural trainees or students to be successful in our allied health programs. What needed to act as supplemental instructional system for students. So we had to kind of fit a line along with the faculty members in instructing students on how to really be successful in allied health programs. And then we had to collaborate with coordinators around the state. So I actually had coordinator, kind of a fellow coordinator in Sitka, so part of the Southeast campus, in Juneau, and in Fairbanks. And so there were 4 of us that would really coordinate together to really break down these divides and these issues that were happening within the system. And this was all done to enhance academic success. So we identified 5 goals, to really help facilitate some activities. So the first goal was to provide personalized support for targeted remote students in order to enhance their engagement in the university community and support their retention and completion. This really went to priority statement, remote and Alaska Native students need greater support. So what we wanted to do is provide that kind of support that needed to happen for students to be successful. So some of the activities that we proposed was that we coordinate with faculty to support students. We needed faculty to understand some of the limitations that students were having. So an example of that was that some of our students live in areas where the weather can be very challenging, high winds and snowstorms, where bandwidth and internet access and phone access can actually be compromised. So we needed to know that students could contact us at any time, and can you bridge that gap with faculty and let them know that this is happening. Sometimes they weren't able to log in and they couldn't get a hold of the faculty member because the faculty member didn't know that they would be calling on the phone because they're actually in a Blackboard session, so an Illuminate Live session. So those were some things that we would recommend with faculty, that they kind of understand that context, because not all of our faculty members had rural experience. They didn't really know some of the things that were going on. We would follow up with students who had not enrolled in the next course in the sequence. As much as I would try to get faculty members to remind students while they're in courses, I would have to do a lot of outreach with students and say, hey, you haven't registered yet, keep going. So I would do reminders, and I'll show you kind of an illustration of that on the next slide. I would represent the student when necessary to resolve problems. We had tons of billing issues, so working with students to do third-party billing and invoicing to their health corporation, and working with them to make sure that they didn't get late fees, and if they did, kind of seeing if there was any way to smooth it over and get rid of the late fees. Refer to other resources and helpers. So if I couldn't fix something, then I would send them to IT, or I would send them to, I'd give them a specific person that they would need to speak with, because most of the students were very frustrated with getting the runaround. So I would do the legwork. I would identify who they needed to speak with, and if I couldn't resolve it myself, then I would say, here are your instructions. Here's your step 1, 2, and 3. This should fix whatever issue that you're having. I developed and disseminated newsletters, and I'll show you an illustration of that on the next slide. I would kind of lend a listening ear for life challenges. A lot of times students just wanted to talk. They just needed to have someone hear their frustrations. There were times that there was nothing that I could do to help them, but just being there and being present and kind of acknowledging that their frustrations were valid, and talking them through some possible solutions, or just saying, I feel your frustrations, was enough to kind of satisfy students and know that they had someone that they could talk to. Demonstrate care and consideration for students, and then send welcome or care packages to show that you care. The isolation that students feel in distance delivered programs can be quite difficult to overcome when you're the only student in that community doing distance delivered coursework, and there's a difference in our work hours. So as full-time workers, they often have similar hours to what we are working, so we're not always available synchronously to help them with their problems. But by showing them that we do really care, that we might not be there 24/7, that we are there for them and we're going to help them through. So part of it was providing that personalized support, was kind of throwing out the welcome mat. I did send out packages to students. They weren't huge, so this is a little bit of a misrepresentation. They weren't big, but it might be some pens and pencils and a little bag. We actually used to send books out to students because that was actually a big issue of students getting books on time. So we would actually make it as part of a course fee and then send out their books. That's actually how I would package them up, is that I would send their textbooks with them and kind of make it fun, so when they opened it, it was kind of a nice little surprise and it wasn't just a textbook. I would send out little reminders. So the image on the right is a reminder that I would send out to students that it's time to register for fall courses, and I did that for each program with my phone number, letting them know that I was there to support them. And then on the left was a newsletter that I did. It was actually a 2-page newsletter that I would send out via email. And prepping for finals, or ordering textbooks, or just issues that we were seeing, how to navigate new upgrades with Blackboard, dates to remember. On the back side of it, I would do, or the second page, I would do faculty profiles. So I would, a lot of faculty were a little resistant to it at first, but I said, it's really important for them to get to know you on a different level. So I would do faculty profiles into special interest kind of topics. And I did that for about a year, and I'll talk about some of the limitations in that. You really have to know your audience, because if you're investing a lot of work in something that the payout isn't great, then you really, especially as a solo advisor or solo coach, you really have to make your investment wisely in what you're going to be doing. So I'll talk about kind of why some of these things fell off my to-do list. So our second goal was to provide advising services to help remote students successfully enroll and register and progress through their chosen health course of study. This is really where I became an academic advisor. Our job was really to help students apply for admissions and register, orient students to the program that they were interested in. So kind of give them a good idea of what to expect in the program, to assist them with the application process, if there was one for the program, and get accustomed to phone, email, Skype chat, offering different hours to accommodate students. So we actually had to adjust what our expectations were in a way of what our job would be, and really formulate it around what the students' needs were. So in my case, I would actually work a little bit later hours because there was a chance that I'd be able to catch them at the later in the day. But also students had to kind of keep in mind that we may not always be available to them by phone, but we would always be available to them via email, and then to acclimate to the idea of using Skype or chat or offering different services based on what our student needs are. That's really dependent on what your demographic of students are. So the students that I worked with and I'm currently working with may be very different than your own student populations, and that's something that you almost have to do an inventory of, okay, who are my students? Where do they live? What are they doing? And that just either comes by doing interviews with them or by doing a survey, looking at their student files, whatever you can kind of glean, either without the student knowing that you're kind of looking at this information, the behind the scenes piece, or asking them directly, what are your needs? What would be helpful for you? Our third goal had to do with technology, and actually this is actually a photo of two students that went through our limited radiography program. The student closest to us actually went on to finish an associate's degree in radiologic technology and is, as far as I know, still working in Bethel. But our job was also to help students through the technology piece of distance delivered coursework, to go through coaching, to go through the troubleshooting, to coach them through the process, and to refer to other supports as needed. We found actually out a really interesting thing about the technology piece, in that most of the students were accessing their coursework through their work computers because that's where the strongest internet access was. Makes sense, they're going to stay there. One thing that we did not anticipate, though, is that the Health Corporation's computer system had very strict firewalls. And we didn't realize that this was the issue, and so we actually had to wind up connecting our IT personnel with their IT personnel to help them so that students could have access to the Illuminate live sessions and the Blackboard content that actually previously they didn't have great access to it because they could only do it through home, and then their internet connection wasn't actually strong enough to support it. So actually, that was something that we didn't anticipate when we developed this, is where students would be accessing their materials and what the firewall systems and the pop-up blockers and things like that, because usually work computers in those areas were not being used for that. Refer to other, some of our programs did have technology facilitators, so getting students to walk through those processes. Sometimes they were really easy fixes, and then sometimes not so much, but we did want to act as a resource for students to be able to overcome those issues. So identify SIStant issues. This is kind of what I was talking about, and we have different kind of territories. The University of Alaska Fairbanks is more of a northern territory. It has a number of different campuses associated with it. Similar to Alaska Anchorage, UAA, that has about 7 or so campuses that are associated with it. And then the University of Alaska Southeast, which has primarily 2 campuses associated with it. These different territories presented a significant issue for students who may be dual enrolled. The distance delivered courses that we offer for foundation courses, so courses like anatomy and physiology or medical terminology, English communication, some of these support classes, they're not all offered at a single campus. We do take somewhat of a statewide approach to not duplicate resources. If a medical terminology class is being offered through the University of Alaska Southeast, and they can really support the statewide need for distance-delivered medical terminology course, then there really wasn't a need to have a student, for UAA to offer that particular course. So the issue was, though, that everyone had slightly different policies, and an example of that is that the University of Alaska Fairbanks has mandatory academic advising. Every student who applies for admissions and is admitted to a degree-seeking program there, certificate or degree-seeking program, is required to get academic advising. University of Alaska Anchorage does not have that issue. But if a student was enrolled or had somehow applied for admissions and then they went to register for a UAA course, we had error messages, and so we had to navigate what was going on and get UAF to lift the hold. UAF actually has a similar policy in place. So I'm not sure whether your state systems have this in place, but it was an issue that we had to identify these there's system barriers that were preventing students from being successful. We also had issues with, most of my students actually had Fairbanks issues, where they may have had a bill from like 20 years ago, like a library book overdue, and we would have to deal with that before students would even be able to enroll in any of our courses. So that was slightly more problematic and maybe more unique to our programs and how the University of Alaska system works. But it was something that we had to address. The last piece, I think that's the last. Yeah, the last goal we had was to identify potential students. So there was this theory that if we build it, they will come, which is partially true. We had a little bit of PR work to do with our previous kind of initial blunder with getting students in and being successful. But we needed to really promote these health programs and make sure that statewide people knew about them. So I worked with employers, K through 12, to really promote allied health programs. And I would say in 2005-2006 area, allied health programs in the state of Alaska were largely underknown, I guess. Not a lot of people knew about the options that students have. And I think even to this day, when you go out and do health career fairs with students, the two things that they really know about are being doctors and nurses. And so there was a little bit of work on my behalf that really went to promoting the options that students had with allied health programs and the fact that you didn't have to go and spend 12 years in school to be a healthcare provider. So I did a bunch of different, first of all, I taught myself publisher as part of this because it took too long to go through other avenues. But I created content to be able to use. So the upper left-hand side really promoted our distance-delivered health programs. This got sent all over the state. The pathways really helped to see that we have a pathways approach to health programs here at the university, and actually a pathways program or project that's used campus-wide. But this was sent all over the place. And then the two note cards at the bottom, our greatest resource for finding prospective students were the employers themselves. They knew that they may have people in their areas that could go into our programs and that might be good candidates. So we would promote our programs, pharmacy technician, limited radiography, dental assisting, phlebotomy, our clinical assistant program. We would do targeted mailings to clinics who had those programs, or to hospitals even that had the need for those areas, and said, here we go, do you know anyone that might be interested in that? And that was actually a really cost-effective way for us to do that, because even though I traveled all over the state and I had the opportunity to travel to Bethel and Dillingham and Kotzebue and Nome, and so all over the state, which is really fantastic for me to learn about the areas of the state that I'd never been to before prior to that. But it was a much more cost-effective way for us to work with, to send out flyers to employers and have them contact us, than it was for me to travel out to a rural area, which was often in $1,500 to $2,000 to travel out to these communities. It was a lot of money. So I started trying to find creative ways to really be more cost-effective with our money without having to do these traveling out to the communities for only 1 or 2 students that we were going to gain from it. So we're getting kind of close to the end, but my advice for advisors and career coaches. I really think it's important to develop a sense of community, and it's very easy, and I think that this is twofold. It is partially to develop a sense of community for your students, You need to make sure that they're engaged, that they feel that they are connected in some way, that they have the access that they need to be successful. But I also think that you have to foster a sense of community with each other. I was extremely fortunate to have 3 other student success coordinators around the state that I could go to, because we were a bit of an anomaly on campus. We weren't really advisors per se. I mean, we did advising, but we didn't fit within the mold that our current institutions had, and so we were actually quite isolated ourselves. I actually remember when I first was hired, I had this office that was really disconnected from the rest of our division, and there was like 2 people in our office of like 20 that I actually spoke with for the first year that I was working there. And that's because I had such a very narrow scope of focus that it really was there was no need for me to talk to any of the other faculty other than the ones that I was directly working with. So, whether that's newsletters or phone conversations or web chats or postcards or whatever you need to develop a sense of community for yourself and for your students, try different things, keeping in mind that every population is going to be slightly different and their needs are going to be slightly different. Be an advocate for your students and for yourself. When students know that you're going to be there for them, then that's going to be that link. It's going to be kind of a light bulb switch where they're going to come to you for everything. And that's kind of where I've hit my stride right now. It's been 7 years, but students knew that I wasn't going anywhere. And I think that's actually one of the challenges that students face, is that even in our positions there's turnover, but I have been here for 7 years, so they know me. They know that they can come to me regardless of whether they finished that program 5 years ago. I still actually have students contacting me who are like, I don't know who to go to for this, but can you answer this question? And I'm more than happy to do that. Be proactive. A lot of the things that I did, I wasn't asked to do. The jobs, and I'm sure you're feeling the same thing, they are brand new. You can really create your own position in a way. And you need to be proactive in the sense of, I just did a newsletter and said, okay, well, we're going to see if this works. Many of the things that I did, even though I was proactive, weren't as successful because the payoff wasn't so great. I only had a couple people reading it, and so then I thought, well, these are busy working professionals. Maybe they don't want to read a newsletter. Maybe they're just content knowing that I'm here for them. And really that was the end result, is they're like, well, I don't really have time to read it. It's kind of nice that you do it, but at the end of the day, it's just nice that if I have a targeted question that you're there for me. So I really reallocated my time into something else. Become a maven. This is in reference, I don't know if how many of you read any Malcolm Gladwell books, but he wrote a book called The Tipping Point, which is a really fantastic read. I actually enjoy many of his books. But it's how little things can make a big difference. And he identifies a few different types of people, but 2 of which I think are applicable to this conversation. The first is connectors, people who know a lot of people and can make introductions. You really need that to, in a way you want to be connectors for your students. You want to be the person that you may not be the expert in that field, but you know how to get them to that right place. And then the second are mavens, which is information specialists. I have been called many things, but whenever I have someone walk into my office, they say, you'll know the answer. We asked everyone else, no one knows the answer to this question. We're positive that you're going to know. And I'm like, oh, well, no pressure. But I have always been ravenous about information. I want to know everything I need to know about something, because I never know when I'm going to need it, and I know some of the most oddball things. But if a student asks me, I'm like, you know what, I seem to recall hearing, this information at this meeting. Let me get back to you, and we'll figure it out. So become information specialists for what you do. Be proactive in the information that you collect, and really have a greater understanding for your system, the advising piece, and your students. Know your students well enough to be able to be a specialist for them. I also recommend promoting self-sufficiency, and this is really a debate that advisors have actually quite a bit, is that part of us want to have a dependency on us so that students will come back to us. I can say as a solo advisor that promoting self-sufficiency in the students that I work with has saved my bacon more times than you can imagine, because I have a caseload now of approximately, well, this entire School of Allied Health has a population of 800 students. I share that workload with about 6 faculty members, but I do all of the first-time freshman advising and continuing advising for a lot of students. So I don't really, as much as I would love to, I don't have the time to have students dependent on me to do everything. And there is a point at which I kind of kick them out of the nest a little bit. So I will work with students initially to do registration. The first maybe 1 or 2 times with my distance students, I give them a little bit longer because I have to keep in mind that sometimes they're only registering for 1 class each semester. So the learning curve for them is going to be different than a student who's maybe registering for 5 classes in a term, and they're doing that for multiple terms. But I kind of say, at some point I say, here's what you need to do. And I do intervene, especially when I can sense frustration on the part of the student if they're being bounced around a lot. But I do think that it's really important that we promote self-sufficiency, because otherwise it can get a little bit crazy when you have so many students to work with and you haven't promoted that sense of you can do it. Like, I know that you can, here's the resources that you need to be successful. And also I have the philosophy that if they're not willing to do things on their own from a student services perspective, that the chances of them translating those skills into the classroom become diminished. So they need to be able to learn to do things on their own, because I won't be there to hold their hand in the classroom. So feel free to adjust that based on what your student population needs are, and everyone's going to be slightly different. You are going to have people that need their hand held a little bit longer, but if you sense that a student is really ready to kind of fly on their own, just let them know you're there for them. But it seems like they have hold of what they need to do. And remember that student success can be facilitated, but it can't really be created. And this is, when someone says, what's your title? And I say student success coordinator, and they ask me, well, what does that mean? I'm like, well, that's a good question. There's this kind of fallacy that somehow we create student success, and we don't. We can create the environment to help students be successful, but we can't do it for the students. We can create all the resources that we want, but at the end of the day, it's the student's responsibility to do what they need to be successful in the classroom. And you kind of have to sometimes accept that some students may not be good fits for these training programs that we offer. I have a lot of students who say, I really want to do your online program because it will fit my work schedule, but I'm not great with computers. And that's a difficult thing that we have to kind of face, to say, well, maybe this isn't the right time. Maybe we can get you in some computer classes first and then get you translated into an online format. But at the end of the day, you can only do so much. But hopefully, as many as you can, that your students are successful. So I wanted to leave, and I think I almost hit my target. I wanted to leave about 10 minutes for questions. And I'm not sure, you're free to ask me, even if I didn't cover it in the scope of this presentation. I wanted to kind of keep it very broad. But if you have questions, I'm more than happy to entertain questions at this point. My contact information is listed, and if you have questions about anything, you can contact me either by email or by phone.
All right, so thank you so much, Lynda. That was really great. I do open it up to questions now. So if you want to pose a question for Lynda, you could either put it in the chat area or click on the talk button and ask her the question directly. Lynda, I do see that Ed Siebert is putting something in the chat window, so we'll hold a second and see if that's a question. That's funny. No pressure.
Can you hear me? This is Lori Cook.
Okay.
Yes, Lori. Do you have a question?
I do. Hi, Lynda. I'm the student success coach at Kodiak College for a medical coding program through this grant. And I was wondering if you might have time to chat with me at another time about some of the different issues that you hit on that I would really like to pick your brain about.
Yeah, actually I didn't know that you got hired yet, but I'd be more than happy to talk with you. I've worked with, we worked with a lot of the faculty and the director at Kodiak College, so I'd be more than happy to talk to you in the future about working with students.
Okay, great. I'll send you an email and maybe get a time that would be convenient for you. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right. Well, Anne has now posted her question.
Okay, so just wondering, how I encourage students to bond with each other while taking coursework. This is a good question. I've tried actually a couple of different things. And the first thing is I do think that fostering the sense of community in the classroom with faculty members can be done. Not all faculty are really great at it, and I will include my faculty members with this, that they're not as engaging as they could be, but I do think that it really starts in the classroom by showing that encouragement. I don't know if you guys use Blackboard, but in Blackboard we actually created a special group. You can do this by finding all the students that you want to add to the Blackboard group and then create special content for those students. So we did that initially where we added all of the students that were part of this program into a Blackboard community and then created content that way with discussion boards and and I've seen this done in other places as well. So that's one way of having them kind of bond together. I would say that other than that, I don't know that I've found other ways for it to be effective outside of the classroom. Other than the sense of community that we created with the Blackboard training. What we try to do is really connect students that are in the same communities. I actually love it when students are, like, if I have at least 2 students in Bethel, because I can pair them up together and say, hey, did you know that there's another student in Bethel? You guys should really think about getting together with each other. And I did try kind of momentarily, it was not effective, I have to say, with our student population, but trying to really say, hey, you should really think about contacting the student and maybe scheduling some Skype sessions. The reason that it wasn't effective in our student population is that they were working professionals who had families. They didn't want a sense of community. I mean, they wanted to stay connected with the program, but at the end of the day, they just wanted to go home and spend time with their families, and they just wanted to make it through the classes. And I do think that the encouragement is important, and you can do that through other ways. So I would say it depends on your student population, I guess, would be my question, or I guess my rebuttal. We did have students who, I would interact with students quite heavily. So if a faculty identified a student who didn't seem to be seemed non-participatory, like they were not participating as much as they could, then I would actually reach out to the student and talk with them and say, how are things going? You know, what can we do? So I would say, if anything, I facilitated more with the student than peer-to-peer, because it just didn't seem as important to the students, even though we tried to facilitate that early on. So hopefully that answered your question. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm not sure if anyone else has any questions.
Yeah, Lynda, I'm checking right now. I don't see anybody in the comment area posting a question. And as I mentioned, you could also use your audio if you had a question that you wanted to ask to Lynda. And while we're just kind of wrapping this up, I do want to mention that we will be sending a survey out via SurveyMonkey for your feedback in relationship to this session. So we encourage you to respond. It's very helpful for us to see what your thoughts are in relationship to the session held today, as well as any additional suggestions you have for future topics. I see Christy is putting something in the comment area, so we'll hold. And she states that this was very helpful. So I think with that, I don't see any other questions, and I don't see anybody grabbing the mic to ask one directly to you, Lynda. So I want to thank you very much for this presentation today. I think it was very insightful, and as you mentioned, definitely it is very consistent as far as the student base that you're serving, very consistent with the student base that others are serving. So I'm going to close right now and just take that opportunity for you to review comments that I know are coming into the discussion chat, and I think they are probably thank you comments for doing this great presentation today. Thank you so much, and just as a reminder, to exit the Blackboard Collaborate session, please do remember to click on the X in the right-hand corner. And at this point in time, I'm also going to stop the recording of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.